Welcome into the channel, everyone. Today we're talking top 48 Dynasty wide receivers with tiers. Let's get to it. Oh man, this is going to be a good episode. Hey, my name is Kyle Yates. Thank you so much for checking out the YouTube channel. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click that bell to get notified for when new content drops here. We're going to take a look at the top 48 Dynasty wide receiver rankings here in my latest update. Of course, these will shift and change, but these are very, very different rankings from redraft perspective. Redraft, these are wide receiver rankings shift weekly, right? The massive rest of season rankings shift dramatically, and then of course weekly rankings shift. But Dynasty, you're making slight adjustments as we move throughout the season, and then you're looking in that 2 to 3 year window. How can things shift with quarterback changes, with offensive coaching situations, with free agency pending? All of these things kind of factor in as I'm shaping and molding these rankings. So we're going to walk through them here. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each of these players because otherwise this would be a 2-hour long video, and I don't have time for that. But what we're going to do here is give you the top 48, and we're going to walk through it right here. Let's go with 48. Wan'Dale Robinson, wide receiver for the New York Giants, 25 years old. Heads into free agency here this next year. Had really good chemistry with Jackson Dart. We saw that here in New York this year, and really saw him be a target hog in this offense. Now, from a PPR perspective, we know that he can be very, very valuable. But does he have the upside to really be a top-tier contributor? Not necessarily. I think he kind of fits in this tier here of players that are solid bench players. So ones that you can roll out into your flex, especially get a boost in some PPR formats. These guys that do have some value as bench players, but ones that you can really rely on as solid, reliable contributors. I'm just not there with Wan'Dale Robinson. That could dramatically change, though, if he does end up leaving the New York Giants and ending up in a much better situation for fantasy football, attached to a more, let's say, reliable quarterback than Jackson Dart, who left plenty of games this past year with concussion evaluations. So those are things to just consider. Wan'Dale Robinson is a player that I could see move up the rankings further than this. Can't move him up too much higher just based on the previous track history, but someone that I am watching going into free agency. Josh Downs at 47, wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts. We saw really good things last year. That took a step back here this past year. Alec Pierce taking a step forward in this offense really didn't allow a ton of opportunities for Josh Downs to be a, weekly, just he's reeling in, he's seeing 7-8 targets a week. So I think if Michael Pittman Jr. does move on from the Indianapolis Colts, if they do let him go this offseason, we could see Josh Downs move back into weekly flex consideration. But for right now, at 24 years old, still a very, very talented player, but one that I'm not relying on as a weekly top 36 starter. Matthew Golden, wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, here at 46, 22 years old. We saw a disappointing rookie season from Golden, but I do think there are reasons to be optimistic for his future. If we do have Romeo Doubs moving on in free agency, that's opening up some target volume. Mixed with wide receiver 45, Jayden Reed for the Green Bay Packers. I think Reed's going to be more involved next year. We saw a very, very injury-riddled season for Reed this past year, which means that Golden really couldn't even take a step forward into that. But for Jayden Reed, I think what we saw this past year is not going to be the level of involvement when he is fully healthy. So that'll all kind of balance out. These are both guys that I think, and even to someone that we'll talk about in a little bit with Christian Watson, I think guys that are all just going to kind of cancel each other out, because I think Tucker Kraft is the number one receiving option in this offense. And then after that, it's all sorts out after that and trickles out. Right now is a solid bench player and someone that you can roll into your flex. Certainly not what you expected for your top tier or a first round pick that you spent on Matthew Golden last year. So that's 46 and 45. At 44 is Khalil Shakir at 25 years old. He was asked to be the number one wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills this past year. And while that led to some reliable target volume, I think the upside was really capped with no outside wide receiver presence really taking a step forward. At the end of the year, we were seeing Brandon Cooks out there at the tail end of his career being that outside wide receiver, deep threat. I don't think that's going to be the case this next year. Joe Brady gets the promotion to the head coach here, so we at least have some offensive continuity where we don't really have to wonder or project what this offense is going to look like next year. I think Shakir settling back into the slot role, if they do upgrade at outside wide receiver, I actually think that helps Shakir, but not going to be a player that you really see moving into a top 24 from a dynasty wide receiver perspective at his age, but someone that can be a very reliable flex option for you in full PPR formats here at 44. At 43, Jakobi Meyers at 29 years old, attached to a good offense. I think his addition really did more for an NFL perspective than it did from a fantasy standpoint, right? Meyers was never really someone once he moved over to Jacksonville that you were like, man, I'm really excited to start Jakobi Meyers in fantasy this week. But he brought enough attention away from the other options in the offense to really open things up and still see enough target volume where you could get away with putting him into your flex. So if Brian Thomas Jr. gets traded this offseason, which I don't project, that leaves Travis Hunter as an unknown in this offense that could lead to more target volume for Jakobi Meyers. If Parker Washington moves on next offseason, Jakobi Meyers could move into the slot role in this offense. So there's still reasons to be optimistic, but not much upside with Jakobi Meyers. That ends that tier from wide receivers 48 through 43. Then we move into this next tier, which is wide receivers 42 through 39 here. That's Christian Watson, wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. Talked about him with Jaden Reed and Matthew Golden. At 26 years old, someone that I think took a massive step forward this past year attached to Jordan Love, coming off of the injury, a step that I didn't really see or expect to happen, but really, really pleasantly surprised. And so I think Watson moving forward, there are going to be some peak games. There are going to be some games where you're very, very excited to put him into your flex and happy that you did so. And then there are going to be some games where all those targets that week ended up going to Matthew Golden because of the matchup, or to Jaden Reed if he comes back into this offense and can take away some targets in the slot area of the field. I think that's just going to be kind of how you're going to have to live with these Green Bay wide receivers. At 41, Brandon Ayuk. Listen, I don't know. I don't know if Brandon Ayuk ends up playing another down of football in the NFL. At 27 years old, he gets the massive contract from the San Francisco 49ers and then apparently just ghosts everyone. He has no contact with the team. We don't know what in the world has gone on with Brandon Ayuk here, and we don't know. I certainly think he has played his last snap with the San Francisco 49ers. So whether or not they move on from him this offseason or they trade him away, I don't know what team would trade for him at this point. We've got to get some contact from Brandon Ayuk and find out what in the world is going on with him. But for the time being, this is still a supremely talented wide receiver that was worthy of the contract that was given to him. He's 27 years old. We can't completely move on from Brandon Ayuk and drop him down to the wide receiver 100 in Dynasty rankings. He's still worthy of being considered as a solid fantasy asset when he is out there. I mean, he could be a top 24 weekly wide receiver based on the talent level. But right now, we just have no clue whether or not he's actually going to end up playing next year. So for the time being, this is a hold in Dynasty. You cannot sell Brandon Ayuk because you're going to be taking a massive risk if he does end up playing somewhere else. And I think that that could be a realistic outcome at 27 years old. That would be different. I would feel differently if he was 31, 32. But I think an NFL team will take a chance on him. It's just a matter of when and what that team looks like. At wide receiver 40, it's Jaden Higgins, wide receiver for the Houston Texans. Didn't see a ton from him here in this rookie year, in his rookie season. With Nico Collins banged up, we didn't see Jaden Higgins really take a massive step forward. So at the end of the year, I think there's reasons to be optimistic, but not necessarily to the point where I'm saying this guy is now a top 24 wide receiver from a dynasty standpoint. He can certainly get there. I just need to see more from him before I move him up over some of these other names. Still just 23 years old. Quentin Johnston, wide receiver 39, the last player in this tier at 24 years old. Very, very talented player from a get the ball in his hands and let him create after the catch. We saw some good things from him last year, and then the offense really kind of fell apart here this last year, where I really don't feel confidence projecting and saying, like, this is who Quentin Johnston is. I think we'll talk about it with Ladd McConkey. I think this whole offense just kind of gets an asterisk this past year with the offensive line woes, and that really breaking everything down, the offensive coordinator not having the answers to be able to pivot to. Quentin Johnston, still a very talented player, still could be a solid fantasy asset next year, one that I'm not willing to completely bury based on how we did here this past year. Then we go into this next tier, and that is wide receivers 38 through 35. We got two Indianapolis Colts wide receivers in this tier for the time being. Michael Pittman Jr. at wide receiver 38, 28 years old here, I think will be let go from the Indianapolis Colts based on the money that he is owed and the cap savings that they can get to be able to retain Alec Pierce. Then I think they will spend that money on Pierce. Pittman could be free to move to a different offense. Hello, Buffalo Bills, I think would be a perfect fit for Michael Pittman Jr. So there's actually a sneaky buy opportunity with Michael Pittman Jr. right now in fantasy and in Dynasty, where the production just has not been there. But It's a risk. He could end up going to somewhere where it's even actually worse than what it was in Indianapolis, but the talent level is still there, I think. And so Michael Pittman Jr. as the X wide receiver, outside wide receiver, deep downfield kind of guy that could pair with Josh Allen really well, I think I could see that happening, and I think that could be a priority target if he is let go from the Indianapolis Colts. One at wide receiver 37 here who is significantly higher than ECR at the time being, which is Michael Wilson, wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. At 25 years old, we saw a fantastic last half of the season from Michael Wilson with some just absolutely elite fantasy performances. In half PPR scoring, we go from week 11, that's wide receiver 2 in fantasy, wide receiver 10, then we go to wide receiver 50, wide receiver 2, 19, 22, 7, and 6 in week 18. Like, he was just absolutely phenomenal from a fantasy standpoint after really being non-existent through the first couple years of his career and even the first part of the season. And then we see Marvin Harrison Jr. really start to struggle, miss some games. Then we see Jacoby Brissett come in, and the Arizona Cardinals offense just goes incredibly pass happy, and that leads to some incredible volume for Wilson. But this was not just a Wilson's being force-fed targets and it's producing fantasy output. He was actually winning in some incredible ways. So I always liked Michael Wilson coming out of Stanford. Really liked him, thought he was underutilized the first couple of years of his career. What that looks like moving forward in Arizona, I don't know if that's going to, with Kyler next year or whoever the quarterback will be, is that going to equate to, weekly production? No, but I'm moving him up the rankings because of what he could be next year. If he ends up in a different offense, right, we could see a true ascension from him. So I'm kind of getting a little bit ahead of the curve in my rankings. Then we move into the top 36. I'm going to try to move a little bit quicker here. Davante Adams, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. When he is fully healthy, when this offense is cooking, when Matthew Stafford is there, we're seeing incredible touchdown production from Davante Adams at this stage of his career. At 33 years old, how much longer is that going to actually continue to happen? That's the question. So you're going to get, while he's playing, borderline top 15 wide receiver production, top 20, as long as Matthew Stafford's there. But we have to move him down the rankings in Dynasty because of the age and because we're playing in this 2 to 3 year window where he might not actually be playing in 2 years. We could get next season and that could be it. So you kind of have to build that into your rankings. Alec Pierce at wide receiver 35 here, the last player in this tier. Really phenomenal year, just crosses the 1,000-yard threshold from a receiving yard standpoint, and really just took off with Daniel Jones as the quarterback. But even at the end of the year, we were still seeing some good things from Alec Pierce. And so I think he's going to get a major payday here in free agency. If he does hit the open market, if Indianapolis retains him, then we could see when Daniel Jones comes back, we could see Alec Pierce just get right back to it and producing as this is another player that I'm significantly higher than ECR right now in Dynasty rankings. Alec Pierce, I think, should have some more respect on his name. Then we move into this next tier, and that is wide receivers 34 through 29. DJ Moore, wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. How much longer is DJ Moore going to be a Chicago Bear? If he is, then we'll see some solid performances from him because I think this offense is going to take another step forward next year with Caleb Williams. But there's talk that DJ Moore actually could be traded from the team this upcoming offseason based on the contract. So that's something to watch here for. Courtland Sutton at 30 years old at wide receiver 33. As the wide receiver 1 for Bo Nix in this offense, I still think we'll see some solid performances. But we now have to be a little bit concerned with these guys in this tier of how much longer can they produce at a solid level, right? When is that drop-off going to start to happen? And so we have to gauge that. And if we are looking to sell Courtland Sutton, can we get a younger player? Is that worth the risk? There's some conversations to be had there with Courtland Sutton this upcoming offseason as to whether or not it's worth moving on from him in a dynasty standpoint. But for the time being, wide receiver 33, still a solid top 36 option for you. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 32. Thought we were going to move Terry McLaurin up into the top 20 consistently from a dynasty standpoint last year, even at 29 years old. Now he's 30 years old, and this offense just completely fell apart here this past year with Jaden Daniels dealing with injury and Terry McLaurin not really able to produce with the likes of Marcus Mariota. So I still have hope for Terry McLaurin next year. I think he's a sneaky buy if you are a contending roster right now. If in your league someone has Terry McLaurin and they are looking to rebuild, then I think that's an offer worth going after and making here because I think he can still produce at a solid level this next season with Jaden Daniels being fully healthy. We're not going to see the Commanders' offense completely fall apart like it did here this past year. Then we go to wide receiver 31, Ricky Pearsall. Like, when he's fully healthy, I think Pearsall's great, but that has been an issue for him. So that moves him down the rankings, where we have to bake into account that he's not going to be probably fully healthy. You're going to deal with some time missed. And even when he does come back and miss playing, then you're going to be working through, is he fully healthy? Is he able to run at 100%? Those are things that I think we're just going to have to continuously deal with here with Ricky Pearsall in San Francisco. Then we go to Kansas City, Xavier Worthy, wide receiver 30, still just 22 years old. I was actually shocked to see how young Xavier Worthy still is. With Rashee Rice coming back, Xavier Worthy was not the same player that he was. This offense really took a step back here this past year. Patrick Mahomes did not look like Patrick Mahomes of years past. And so now going into this next year, when does Mahomes come back off of his injury? Are we going to even be comfortable with what Xavier Worthy's doing in that time frame? And then if Rashee Rice is still with the team, that's a greater conversation. We can get to that. Is Xavier Worthy going to be the type of player that can get back to what he was doing previously and being a 6+ target per game option? Or is he, man, you're running go routes, you're running some cardio, and you're opening things up for everyone else in the offense? That's something to be concerned about. So I would actually put him a little bit lower than this in like the weekly dynasty rankings and weekly fantasy rankings. But at 22 years old, there's still a very, very bright future for Xavier Worthy. This is still going to be younger than a lot of the wide receivers that are entering the NFL draft. And we at least know that Xavier Worthy can contribute in the NFL. Travis Hunter at wide receiver 29. 22 years old. This is really a placeholder because I don't know what this offense is going to do with him next year. I think Travis Hunter is best suited, and I thought this going into the NFL draft, but Travis Hunter is best suited for defensive back role with get him 5 touches per game on offense. When he is on the field, you're getting the ball into his hands, right? And so limited snaps on offense, that's just not going to be enough to really be a top-tier fantasy contributor. But I can't bury him from a dynasty standpoint because I don't know that to be fully the case. Do they trade Brian Thomas Jr. this offseason? Again, we talked about that. I don't think that to be the case. But if they do, then that signals that they have a greater plan for Travis Hunter on offense. So right now, kind of a placeholder. I'm a little concerned with Travis Hunter here from a dynasty standpoint. If you can get someone in your league to bite and give you good value on him, then I would trade him away. Then we go into this next tier. That's DK Metcalf at wide receiver 28 years old now. Really, this tier is kind of like guys that you're okay starting week in and week out, but really not super excited for what their upside is. Then we go to Jordan Addison, wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings. This was one, I want your opinions in the comments, because Jordan Addison, with the off-the-field stuff and with the quarterback questions, I just don't really know what to do with him. Like, I think we saw what he could do with Sam Darnold, and that was fantastic last year. But then this year, the whole offense was terrible. And so do we see a clear quarterback upgrade for Jordan Addison still at 24 years old where we can feel confident ranking him higher than this? This was one where I was legitimately like, I don't know. Wide receiver 27 sounds like a good spot. Jalen Waddle at wide receiver 26. Does he get traded this offseason? Does Miami completely blow things up here under Jeff Hafley? There's a question there. But for the time being, wide receiver 26, still a very, very talented player at 27 years old. Devontae Smith at wide receiver 25 at 27 years old here. Does A.J. Brown get traded this offseason? There's a very good chance that that happens. And so then Devontae Smith could be the main target option here in this offense moving forward. What does that look like? Who's the offensive coordinator? We still don't have that question at the time of recording. Can Devontae Smith be a true wide receiver 1, or do they go get a big-bodied wide receiver to fill that role, and Devontae Smith kind of stays in this wide receiver 2 role for an NFL offense? Questions to be had there, but still someone that you can roll out there as your wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in Dynasty week in and week out, and be happy with the production there. Zay Flowers at wide receiver 24. You're going to get some boom performances from Zay Flowers. Does this offense take another step forward this next year with the coaching shift? And do we see this offense really start to take some strides back to what it was previously? Is just the change and the rejuvenation in this offense, does that lead to Zay Flowers and Lamar Jackson getting back to playing at a MVP level? And that then equates to Zay Flowers having some very, very solid, reliable production. I couldn't move him down super far. I still think you're going to be able to get some big performances from him. And if we do get the old Lamar Jackson with a new coaching staff, then we could see Zay Flowers move back up the dynasty rankings slightly for me. Then this next tier, which is wide receivers 23 through 19, this is Jameson Williams, wide receiver for the Detroit Lions here at 24 years old. T. Higgins at wide receiver 22. He's 27 years old. Marvin Harrison Jr. at wide receiver 21 at 23 years old. Rome Odunze, and then I'll go Luther Burden here at wide receiver 19. Luther Burden is probably the player that I am the highest on in Dynasty compared to the ECR last time that I checked, where I'm really, really optimistic for Luther Burden being the wide receiver 1 in this offense next year, where at 22 years old, I talked about him in my wide receivers to buy episode. Luther Burden's a very, very intriguing name where I think you are buying a little bit high, but I think it might still be worth the cost. Rome Odunze was one that once he came back off the injury, we didn't see the same level of Rome Odunze that we had in the past. And then we saw him start to get into his head. When he comes back in the back half of the season and then into the NFL playoffs, we're seeing some uncharacteristic drops from Rome Odunze. We're not seeing him and Caleb Williams on the same page. I think that's going to be a point of emphasis this offseason for this coaching staff and for Caleb Williams. So I'm at least holding him here right now, but you did not get wide receiver 20 in Dynasty production from Rome Odunze this year. I'll go back to wide receiver 22. T. Higgins is someone that I'm optimistic for moving forward. I mean, when we saw Joe Burrow come back, we saw T. Higgins be a very, very solid fantasy asset. In week 11, wide receiver 15. In week 9, wide receiver 2. In week 14, wide receiver 4. He dealt with some injury, missed a couple games in there. And then wide receiver 20, 37, wide receiver 9 in week 18. Like, we're still seeing peak production from T. Higgins when he's healthy and when Joe Burrow is healthy. There's just questions to how much is that going to happen. So at 27 years old, I think there's some people that are just tired of the whole Bengals drama with all the excuses of, well, Joe Burrow's missed time and T. Higgins has missed time. And if that creates a buy opportunity for me, then I'm going after T. Higgins in Dynasty. Then Marvin Harrison Jr., I'll touch on briefly. I don't know. I don't think we can completely bury Marvin Harrison Jr. from a Dynasty standpoint. At 23 years old, this was an elite prospect coming out. The skill set may not have always fit the body frame that Marvin Harrison Jr. had, right? He's got to get better in contested catch situations, which at his size, he should be much better in, and that has just not been the case. But the quarterback play hasn't been great, but yet we saw Michael Wilson get it done. So I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is not a top 12 Dynasty wide receiver, certainly not. He can't be outside the top 30 based on his age, not just yet. I don't think we can move him further down at this point. So Marvin Harrison Jr. for the time being here at wide receiver 21 in this same tier with some very, very talented players who have questions but have insane upside. Then we go into this next tier, A.J. Brown at wide receiver 18. Brian Thomas Jr. moving down the rankings to wide receiver 17 based on a very, very lackluster 2025 season with Liam Cohen in the first year. Was opening things up for this offense, right? We saw really good things from this offense, and from an NFL standpoint, didn't look like anything what we saw from Brian Thomas Jr. in his rookie season. Then Chris Olave at wide receiver 16, Ladd McConkey at wide receiver 15, Garrett Wilson at 14, and then Rashee Rice at 13. I think this entire tier, you could just take an entire question mark and draw it over all of those players. Like Rashee Rice, he's moving down the rankings because are we going to see more off the field stuff? Are we going to see the off the field accusation for domestic violence that happened just a few weeks ago? Are we going to see that equate to a suspension again? Are we going to see Kansas City just completely move on from him? We don't know that yet. So right now, just a placeholder. Garrett Wilson, question mark. Who's going to throw him the ball? Ladd McConkey, can we see him get back to his rookie season production? Chris Olave, can he stay healthy? Does one more concussion move Chris Olave out of the NFL? Brian Thomas Jr., can he get back to A.J. Brown? Can he get back to the A.J. Brown of old, right? It's just an entire question mark for these guys, but still tremendous upside for each of them when it does hit. So can't really move them into the top 12, really any of these guys into the top 12. I can't move them past wide receiver 18. So they all kind of get put into this tier. If you wanted to put A.J. Brown at 13, Rashee Rice down at 18, this is where this tier kind of makes sense for me. Then we move into the top 12. Let's go George Pickens, wide receiver for Dallas. Just 24 years old, coming up on a contract, right? Heading into free agency this year. Still just 24 years old. That really surprised me. I thought he was much older than that. And so a phenomenal year. Is he back with Dallas next year? Do they have the cap space? Do they have the money where they're going to invest in that? I think based on the trade and how well that worked out, I think they'll find the money, but it's Dallas. They traded Micah Parsons, and that didn't make any sense. So we'll see what happens there. George Pickens could end up in a worse situation, just like what we saw with Pittsburgh previously, or he could end up in a better situation. So there's reason to just kind of hold him here for right now. But if you held on to George Pickens that entire time that he was in Pittsburgh, congratulations, because that worked out really, really well for you. Wide receiver 11, Emeka Egbuka. I've talked about him extensively on this channel previously, where I think it's still at 23 years old. The first 5 weeks of the season, you thought you had an absolute superstar. Then he gets his hamstring injury in week 6, and I think plays through that for the remainder of the year. Just nothing went his way throughout the latter half of the year. I think that's going to change. I can't move Emeka Egbuka out of my top 12. Let me know if you can. Let me know where you're ranking Emeka Egbuka in Dynasty. Tetairoa McMillan here at 10. Really solid fantasy year here from him in his first season. 22 years old. Delivered on the draft capital. And so he's a top 10 player for me in Dynasty based on that age and based on his skill set. Nico Collins at wide receiver 9 at 26 years old. Yes, we have to be concerned about CJ Stroud and what we saw in the NFL playoffs, but yet Nico Collins, when he's fully healthy, when CJ Stroud is on, we see elite production from him. Drake London at wide receiver 8 at 24 years old. I still think we have to move forward with Drake London being a wide receiver 1 for Dynasty. I don't think he showed me anything this year to move off of that. And if Kyle Pitts does leave in free agency, then that just opens up more targets here for Drake London. Then we go into the top 7, and there's really no question marks here with any of these guys, aside from maybe Justin Jefferson, but I think that the talent level's still there. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, how healthy does he come off the injury? That's something to be wary of, but it's still, when Neighbors is healthy, man, he's still just 22 years old. He's an elite wide receiver. Then Justin Jefferson, then CeeDee Lamb. All those guys kind of in the same tier where you're really not having many questions with them, where they're solid, elite upside. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, all 26 years old, and then Malik Neighbors, 22 years old. Then we move into the final tier here in the top 3. That's Jackson Smith and Jigba moving into that top 3 for me with just a stupid year here this year at 23 years old. Puka Nacua at wide receiver 2 at 24 years old, and then Jamar Chase still at wide receiver 1 in Dynasty for me at 25 years old. Puka is the one that I'm watching. I don't think Matthew Stafford will retire based on how this year ended. I think he comes back for one more year and they try to get it done and get back to the Super Bowl. I think that could happen here. But we've seen crazier things happen in the offseason, so stay tuned there. But I think even if they go to a different quarterback than Matthew Stafford, it's still Puka Nacua. He's going to get it done no matter who's throwing him the ball. So that's the top 3 there: Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. All right, there's top 48 wide receivers here for you from a Dynasty standpoint. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and click the bell to get notified for when new content drops. Appreciate you all. I'll be back soon with another video. Until then, take care.